Today is decision day for five-star running back Derrek Cooper. While the Miami Hurricanes are very much in the mix, another new expert prediction indicates this one could very well go in a different direction.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Sunday. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and host of Post Game on the Miami Hurricanes radio network. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. On this episode, Ask and Ye Shall Receive, I am going to project my Miami Hurricanes starting lineup for the 2025 season, keeping in mind there's going to be some battles, training camp, which is coming up July 31st, but I'll tell you where it sits in my brain as of today. Now, what's on everybody's brain today as we count you down to a 7 o'clock p.m. decision tonight is what five-star athlete, running back, Derrek Cooper out of Chaminade Madonna, what he's going to decide tonight between a top five that includes the hometown Miami Hurricanes, who have been putting in a lot of time and effort and building that relationship for years with him. The Texas Longhorns are in that top five. That's the team that's been trending as of late. The Georgia Bulldogs. There was actually a time briefly, I think for a couple of weeks, when he was committed verbally to Georgia, walked it back, reopened his recruitment. Ohio State is in the mix. I mean, coming off a national championship, why the heck not? They probably should be in the mix for most of the top, running backs out there and the five-star recruits out there. And the Florida State Seminoles are also in that top five. Not really believe that they have much of any momentum going into this, but they are going to have a hat on the table nonetheless. And, folks, the sentiment, of course, has changed throughout the process for Derrek Cooper. Obviously, there was a time when he was committed to Georgia, and even after he walked back that commitment, the Georgia Bulldogs were trending at times for him. Miami was trending at times for him. In fact, shortly before Cooper postponed his announcement date, he was originally going to announce on July 12th, and then he pushed it back indefinitely before deciding on July 20th. And before he pushed back the July 12th date, I thought that was a time where Miami, at least, for what it's worth, the reports indicated the Hurricanes were probably the team to beat at that point, but the momentum seemed to change when he pushed back his recruiting date. So the latest when it comes to the trends for Derrek Cooper, as we're, a little under 8 hours away from his decision coming up later tonight, Steve Wiltfong from On3 Sports and Rivals, they recently merged, has dropped his expert prediction early this morning, and he joins that momentum train for Texas. Wiltfong has put his pick in, his RPM prediction in on the Texas Longhorns. He says at 7 p.m., the Rivals Industries number 2 running back Derrek Cooper will announce his college plans, and the intel favors Texas, Wiltfong writes. Miami looks like the top competition and cannot be discounted. Georgia and Ohio State have also been prominent in Cooper's recruitment. He says it's been quiet around Miami the last couple of days. And by Miami, he doesn't mean like University of Miami. He means the Miami area where Cooper lives. He says it's been quiet around Miami the last couple of days, but sources indicate Miami continues to push. He says the 6'1.5", 228-pound Cooper is the nation's number 37 prospect, regardless of position. And when he talked about the various visits that he's taken, I remember him saying about Miami, that, hey, this is home for me. We love the coaches. We appreciate what Cristobal and Matt Merritt are doing. And, my understanding, folks, is where, again, things have gotten pretty quiet in the Cooper camp, over the last couple of days. I can guarantee you Miami is still pushing in these final hours. I mean, these unless the Cooper family just decides to turn all their phones off just to keep things radio silent heading into the announcement. I'm sure Miami is still working this one behind the scenes. Of course, they have spent years trying to build the relationship with Derrek Cooper and his family. We've said it in the past. His mom really likes Miami and, may favor the idea of her son staying home, but it's ultimately not her decision. It's his decision, but I'm sure Miami will keep pushing in the final hours. And obviously this is one of those things where it's not technically over on July 20th. It's not over till December 20th or 21st is when National Signing Day is this year. And so, yeah, listen, my gut for the past couple of weeks, just based on all of the industry sources and everything that's being bantied about behind the scenes, I would favor Texas to get the verbal commitment tonight. I'm going to throw my own Hail Mary because I'm taking my wife out to a nice dinner this evening. We couldn't afford another vacation after spending 6 weeks in Europe, but I'm taking my wife out to dinner, hoping I can work some Donno Juju magic. Maybe, at 7 o'clock when I'm enjoying a steak tonight, maybe Miami can pull off the upset here and land Derrek Cooper. But most of the intel has been going in the Texas Longhorns direction. And of course, it's a team that has been very hot on the field in addition to being hot on the trail. Their NIL situation is extremely robust, as you would imagine. They just flipped James Johnson from Georgia recently, the top defensive tackle in the class. They've been landing a ton of players. Obviously, landing a guy like Derrek Cooper today could be sort of the icing on the cake for what's been one of the hottest surging recruiting classes in the country. And, the Longhorns obviously come off of a, college football playoff victory last year, a college football playoff appearance the year before. Arch Manning is really the hottest name in college football right now, even though the guy has barely played. So the Texas momentum is going to be hard to beat. But I know in case of, Miami trying to pull off, I guess, the upset victory tonight for Derrek Cooper, you would try to lean on, the home thing, family having an easier time coming to games with Miami Gardens just being down the street on game day. And then again, the relationships that Miami has been putting in with Derrek Cooper for a long time. Now, this has been, as we've documented here on Locked On Canes, a very weird recruiting cycle when it comes to the South Florida players. And I think 2026 has been a bit of an anomaly because Miami already has more South Florida players committed verbally in the class of 2027 than they do in the class of 2026. Miami has done a good job in state, but not as good of a job Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County, where at this moment, Jordan Campbell from Miami-Dade County, running back Javian Mallory from Palm Beach County, those are the only two South Florida kids that Miami has verbally committed for the class of 2026 at this moment. And so, all right. And it's interesting why I'm not completely, ruling out Cooper heading into the final hours before his decision, because you're going to hear some conflicting information. Like when it comes to the solid professional media sourcing, most of the momentum in the intel has been turning in Texas's direction. I was checking out what the Texas 24/7 moderators were saying last night and this morning. Hank South, who's one of the moderators of that site, was saying, hey, the intel favors Texas. He logged his official pick for Texas to land Derrek Cooper. Yeah, I was told something from a non-media source, like something from a couple of days ago, an encounter that this person had with a member of the Cooper inner circle that kind of indicated to this person that, hey, maybe it's going to be Miami that's going to be the pick. So I'm not completely counting this one out, but I'll tell you what it starts to feel a little bit like, folks. We all remember, and again, today is not National Signing Day, thankfully. So no matter what happens, if it's good for Miami tonight, you're still going to have to play defense and try to keep Cooper committed until National Signing Day rolls around in late December. If it doesn't go your way tonight, you're obviously going to keep pushing, keep surging, keep recruiting, try to keep that relationship going until National Signing Day. But doesn't this remind you like a little bit of, the final hours before Jeremiah Smith ultimately signed his national letter of intent for Ohio State, where Miami made this really big surge and it really looked like Miami was going to pull off the flip at the last minute. Kind of feels a little bit like David Stone a couple of years ago when he was about to pick Miami and he picked Oklahoma. When you're talking about high stakes, big boy recruiting, when you're talking about players like Derrek Cooper, who is, 6'1", 205 pounds, 5-star on the 24/7 composite. He likes to play running back, but he could also play linebacker or safety if he wanted to. That high stakes recruiting like this, sometimes the trends are going to change even in the hours before the decision is made. And, we had a conversation on, I think, Monday or Tuesday with Larry Bluestein, who has been scouting Cooper practically since he was in diapers. Like, Larry has been scouting Coop since he was playing Pee Wee football. And he even mentioned to us that, man, like, really, maybe the position for Cooper, like, with the highest upside would be if he really decides to devote himself to being a linebacker, that may be where he can really make the biggest impact. And of course, not saying running backs aren't valuable, but that's just a little bit more of an interchangeable position where if you have like an elite linebacker or an elite safety, that maybe that ends up being position move that he makes, whether it's Miami or otherwise for him. But, wanted to share that on Cooper. Steve Wiltfong, logged his prediction this morning for the Texas Longhorns to get it done. And interestingly enough, Cooper had mentioned, and this is another reason why Texas seems to have a lot of, Uncle Mo going in their direction, that Cooper, who's not even made an official visit to Texas, he visited them unofficially, I think, in April, but they were not one of the teams that got his summer OVs. And like he had mentioned that, hey, no matter where he commits tonight, that he still plans to make a game day visit to Austin coming up in the fall. So it's like, even if he does go a different direction, if he were to pick Miami or pick Georgia tonight, it sounds like he still wants to make a game day visit to Texas. So Texas would try to make a flip no matter what's going on. So that is the latest on Derrek Cooper. I also want to discuss, some other players who could be in Miami's crosshairs when it comes to potential recruits Miami can still land, because it really does feel like here in late July that a lot of your 2026 targets are either already committed to Miami or committed elsewhere, that there's not a whole lot of like undeclared guys at this point that you're trying to keep your own or you're trying to flip others. So who are some other recruits on the radar for Miami? Plus, I was asked a question by a Locked On Canes insider, by two of them, in fact, so I have to answer my projected Miami Hurricanes starting lineups for the upcoming season. You want to keep it locked right here, my friends. We're only getting started on this brand new Sunday episode of Locked On Canes. We're only getting started with Monarch Money. Do you ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch Money puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Folks, since I've been on Monarch, it does a great job consolidating all of my financial info into one place. I don't have to juggle dozens of different apps, and I get so many insights on how I'm spending and overspending on things like restaurants, food delivery, vacations. Like, it really helps me buckle down, and it's really changing my life. And you can take control of your finances too with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. And if you want to take your everydayer experience to the next level, click the link in the show description below and become a Locked On Canes insider. You get text messages directly from my phone to yours, one-on-one questions and answers, breaking news, recruiting scoops, good or bad. We had some good news with Samori and Wingo last week, some not so good trends so far with Derrek Cooper. But if something good does happen, we'll let you know in the Locked On Canes Insiders chat. Try it free for 14 days. And then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. Give you a lot of added value on there on the Locked On Canes Insiders chat. So we'll have a 7 o'clock announcement, 7 o'clock Eastern time announcement for Derrek Cooper. And if he doesn't pick Miami, I feel like the 7 p.m. thing is such a troll, because that's Miami time. 7 p.m. is usually when Miami lands verbal commit. So, Coop, it's one thing. If you're going to go in a different direction, that's one thing. But you don't have to disrespect us like that, man. Of course, I'm joking. And sometimes when we talk about the South Florida recruits, I know we'll get messages from people who are like, you know what, the local kids are such divas. Who needs them? And maybe that's true for certain players, but I don't believe that's the case for Derrek Cooper. I mean, I don't know the young man personally, but everything that I hear from folks like Brian Smith and Larry Bluestein, who go back with him and have scouted him personally and have had conversations with the young man, it really sounds like he's a great kid from a great family. Like, I don't think, like, maybe there are some South Florida players that have a little bit of that, Hollywood DNA. And ironically enough, Cooper is in Hollywood, Florida, but he's not Hollywood. I think he's a good player, and I hope he ultimately does end up picking Miami. All right, so where does Miami go next? And again, obviously the Hurricanes they currently have 21 verbal commits in the class of 2026, top 10 recruiting class on the 24/7 composite, most of the other recruiting services. But you would expect the class to have more than 21 players in it when it's all said and done. So they're going to eye some flips down the road. Yeah, I know that, waiting for late flips didn't work so well for Miami in 2025 recruiting cycle, but it did work out well in 2024. They were able to land some big flips like Justin Scott and Armando Blunt, for example, late in the process. And of course, Miami won't stop recruiting Derrek Cooper, even if they don't get good news tonight. They will not stop recruiting some of their top defensive line targets, like James Johnson, for example, who already has flipped once from Georgia to Texas. He's playing at Miami Northwestern this season, so the Hurricanes will keep an eye on him. Miami, as we know, is still trying to flip top wide receiver Tristan Keys from his commitment to LSU. And it's one of those things where I don't, if you had to ask me, like, Miami versus the field, I would probably take the field. I can't say for sure that Keys is going to end up a Miami Hurricane, but there is a feeling that it's probably not going to be LSU. That even though Keys has been verbally committed to the Tigers since March, there's been a lot of buzz. He's an Adidas athlete now. Some of the three-stripe schools like Tennessee, Texas A&M, and even Miami are getting some buzz that it just might make more sense for his NIL portfolio as an Adidas player to end up flipping for an Adidas school. So that's something we'll watch out for. But aside from a lot of the potential flips, a player who I think can come back into the radar, and Miami has had some misses at the safety position, but a player that they hosted for an official visit, back in May or June, and the Hurricanes have recruited hard in the past. Like, things got a little bit quiet on the Cortez Redding front, but there seems to be some growing momentum. I know Gabby Urruti at Inside the U mentioned it, that Miami might start to turn up the heat again for 4-star safety Cortez Redding out of Jonesboro, Georgia. He remains uncommitted at this time. He's a little bit undersized, but I think he makes up for it with other qualities and could continue to grow into his frame a little bit. So Cortez Redding could be somebody Miami turns up the heat for at the safety position. And then, we've talked about a Miami 2027 commit, Kenton Dobson, who's more than likely going to reclassify. Excellent defensive back, one of the top DBs in the class of 2027. He seems physically mature enough to play a year early in 2026. Good chance he reclassifies. Great chance he remains a Miami Hurricanes commit. So that right there could add another good member of the class of 2026. And then there's a Northwestern receiver who I know you guys know, not Calvin Russell, the other one who might even be better, Nick Lanier, who's a 2027 right now. There's maybe some buzz he might reclassify to 2026, but here's the thing. Whether Lanier reclassifies or not, there is some Syracuse momentum for him that he might, want to follow his good friend and his teammate Calvin Russell to the Cuse. Syracuse might be epically bad this year on the field, though, so we'll see if any opinions might change there. But Miami could end up battling Syracuse for Nick Lanier, who's an excellent player. Whether or not he reclassifies from 27 to 26, but I think there's a possibility for that. But all right, let's answer some of you guys' questions on the Locked On Canes Insiders chat. And by the way, we're live right now on YouTube. So if you're watching us live, smash that like button and subscribe. Tell us, by the way, in the comments, where do you think Derrek Cooper is going to end up committing to tonight? The crystal balls, the intelligence, the trends, they all favor the Texas Longhorns. But even Wiltfong, Wiltfong did mention, don't completely rule out Miami. And I will point out that for as good as Wiltfong is at his job, like we call him the Grim Reaper, because if he makes a pick against you, that's usually a wrap. Recruiting has changed so much the last couple of years that, sometimes even the Fong puts a foot wrong on this stuff. He had been picking Georgia to land Jackson Cantwell until like hours before Cantwell picked Miami. Wiltfong flipped his pick late in the process. So this is not an exact science, all right? I mean, there would be nothing better than if, around 5 o'clock today, if we see Wiltfong flip his RPM prediction over to Miami. So, it's not an exact science for Fong or for anybody to predict this stuff. But all right, we get a question from two different Locked On Canes insiders, including our everydayer Derrek in Nashville, who says, "Hey, I would love to hear your starting 22 before training camp starts for the Hurricanes." All right, so let me put my starting 22 prediction on record for today. And then in, 11 days when fall camp starts and I'll be out there watching the first couple of practices, I'll let you know if my opinions change on any of this stuff. Because remember, some of the players, even some of the guys that I have in my starting 22 are guys who arrived after spring that we haven't even seen practice as Hurricanes yet. So here's my projected starting offense. And feel free to argue. Feel free to rip me to shreds if you disagree with any of this. Easy one. I've got Carson Beck as my quarterback 1. I've got Mark Fletcher as my starting running back. Now, running back is a spot where it probably matters, very little who starts. I think Fletcher deserves to be a starter this year. But between Jordan Lyle and Marty Brown, I think these guys are all going to push each other, and you'll ride the hot hand at certain times. But I'm going to go safe pick. Mark Fletcher is my starting running back. I believe in that. Offensive line, I've got Markel Bell, who we talked about the other day, 6'9", 340, has improved his game so much since the start of last year when it comes to his footwork, his technique. Markel is not just a big body. He has become a complete offensive lineman. And this is someone, by the way, who's going to end up, I think, skyrocketing up the NFL draft boards by the end of this season. So I got Big Bell as my left tackle. There's going to be a competition at left guard. I'm going to predict Matthew McCoy to win that by the skin of his nose. I'm going to go Matt McCoy, left guard. James Brockermeyer, center. That one seems pretty clear, the experience transfer from TCU. And then on the right side, clear as day. Inez Cooper, your starting right guard. Francis Mauinoa, your starting right tackle. I feel very strongly about the right side of that offensive line. How about your receivers? This is a little tougher, right? Because you got a lot of new faces at receiver, and you got a lot of guys who haven't contributed at Miami up to this point. I'm going to go, though, with C.J. Daniels and JoJo Trader, along with Tony Johnson in the slot. That's going to be my predicted starting 3 receivers. Now, especially at the slot, Johnson's going to have some competition, but I think based on the experience that he brings over from Cincinnati, and I think it was FAU before that, I'm going to lean to Johnson, but that's one we'll have to find out once practices begin. But C.J. Daniels and JoJo Trader at the boundary. Tight end, I'm going to go with Elijah Lofton. I think Miami does have some depth there, but Lofton, I think, is the best player of that group. All right, defense. I'm going to go on the edge. I'm going to have Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor as my starters at edge rusher. Interior, I'm going to lean to David Blay and Justin Scott as my starters, but, Ahmad Moten would not surprise me if he starts over either of those guys. I think that's a really strong, especially the strong 3-man rotation there, but I'll go with Blay and Scott. Scott, to me, is ready to take a big step forward, former 5-star recruit heading into his second year. I'm going to go at the linebacker, 2 linebacker spots. I'll go Muhammad Toure at Mike linebacker, Wes Besant at Will linebacker. There's going to be some competitions there as well. Cornerbacks, I'm going to go with O.J. Frederic and Xavier Lucas at corner. I'll go with Keontae Scott at nickel. I feel really strongly about that. I mean, Scott, a couple years ago at Auburn was, an all SEC at the nickel position. I think that's his strongest position. He's going to move back there this year. Safeties. I'm going to go with Zechariah Poyser, who transferred in from Jacksonville State. And I'm going to go with Jacobe Thomas, who transferred in from Tennessee. Now, Poyser was here for spring. Thomas was not. But Thomas is someone who is actually trending into Tennessee's starting lineup before he left. So it's not like Thomas left because he wasn't going to start at Tennessee. He was actually going to start at Tennessee, but he left anyway. I think that's a good sign. I think he'll end up, rising to the top of that depth chart here. But again, this is pre training camp. This is a very rough draft for me. I think the position groups that are going to have the most competition will probably be receiver Because again, you've got, Keelan Marion who transferred in. He's going to be hungry for reps. Nye Carr, who had the opportunity to leave, but decided to stay after briefly entering the transfer portal. I've got to think if Carr decided to stay, he got some indications that his standing at Miami is maybe better than he initially thought. He's going to get opportunities there. Malachi Toney and Josh Moore, a couple of true freshmen. These guys look fantastic in spring football. Like to start as a true freshman is always difficult, but these guys are going to contend for playing time. They're going to push, especially Toney, I think can really push to be a starter in the slot. In fact, I can't remember who it was. It might have been either Matt Shodell or Gary Furman at Kane Sport. I think it was Gary a couple months back. Like he put out a predicted starting offense, and he even predicted Malachi Toney to flat out win the starting job, in the slot. And of course, Ray Joseph is also someone who's, been waiting behind Xavier Restrepo for the last couple of years. He can try for that starting job as well. So receiver, going to be some competition. Definitely will be competition at defensive back with all the new faces. And also not just new faces. Somebody put it in my YouTube comments the other day, and I feel bad for not talking about this player, but he had such bad injury luck. What about Damari Brown? I mean, Damari Brown is someone, he's like the biggest when healthy. You always start when healthy with Damari Brown, because the opportunities that Damari's gotten, he's had bad injury luck, but he's been really good, really physical. He's got the body type where Brown, if he wants to, could even get some work in at safety this year. He's also proven to play well at corner when he's gotten opportunities. Damari Brown is a name I don't bring up enough, because unfortunately with the bad injury luck he's had, sometimes he gets lost in that cavernous brain of mine where they say people use 10% of their brain. I use 1% of mine. I've got a lot of extra space up there that does not get accounted for. And then another name that someone brought up to me when we're talking about the pass rush is Malik Bryant. There were certain situations last year where Malik Bryant was taking over on some downs. He came into Miami as a linebacker, had a lot of edge experience coming out of Jones High School in Orlando. He's moved back to the edge, and Malik is powerful and he's dangerous. So that's another one. I don't necessarily think he's going to be a starter when you're looking at guys like Akeem Mesidor and Ruben Bain, but I think Malik Bryant is going to end up being a valuable part of that rotation, as is Armando Blunt. Raised. I appreciate you bringing up Blunt's name. Armando Blunt had a really good spring. And remember with him, he was a true freshman last year, was an early enrollee true freshman, and a reclassified true freshman who came into college a year early. Now, there are certain positions where, maybe you can get on the field a year early out of high school, but when it comes to defensive line, it's a little bit tougher with the physical maturity that comes into play. And I think Blunt also had some injury issues, but Armando Blunt's a former 5-star recruit, and I think he had a tremendous offseason, a tremendous spring. So that's another one that I probably don't bring up enough in terms of, guys who can really battle for spots. A question just came in from John in Tampa on the Locked On Canes Insiders chat. He says, hey, what's your official prediction on our percentage chances to get good news for the Derrek Cooper announcement tonight? He says, I think we're at 30% or so. I'm going to go 15 to 20%, John. And again, it's I was told something the other day, but again, this is people that I consider to be reliable sources are, people who work in this industry, who kind of understand how to filter, real reports from hearsay, type. So, I was given a piece of information from someone who's not in the reporting game, and it can be easy to get, misdirected, and, who gave me something that really told me, oh, you know what? Miami might end up low key being the pick tonight, but you have to be able to filter your information, folks. I'm not one of those people who's I heard something at the barber shop today, and Cooper's going to be a Cane 1,000%. That's not the way that I do this. I try to, filter out the information that I get, but I'm not completely giving up hope. I'll tell you that. Although when it comes to the reliable sources in the official channels, it's looking 80-85% that Cooper is going to be a Longhorn tonight. I do think Miami's trending in second place for what that's worth. And it's not worth nothing, because if you're trending in second place July 20th, maybe by December 20th, you can improve your trend into first place as the poet Yogi Berra once said, "It ain't over till it's over." That's kind of where I'm at with Cooper. Someone asks for a Xavier Lucas update. Yeah, I was on a Wisconsin radio show the other day, ESPN Madison, Wisconsin, and from what we were talking about it a little bit, I don't think there is a significant update on what's going on with the Wisconsin lawsuit. I do think that they're going to be squabbling over like where the jurisdiction is. Is this going to take place in Wisconsin, or is it going to take place in Florida? Because obviously Miami, if it does go to court, Miami would not want that to be in a Wisconsin court because you're probably not going to get favorable treatment there. You prefer a different venue somewhere else. But where I think it's headed, I don't expect Miami to face any sort of significant like sanctions or punishment. I think what Wisconsin really wants is they want that contract that they, basically forced Xavier Lucas to sign to try to lock in his rights for multiple years, which I believe is a major antitrust violation. And not only that, you're trying to lock in his revenue sharing rights at the time, 6 months before revenue sharing was even approved, which is ridiculous to me, how you can consider that to be a binding contract. But I think Wisconsin wants that contract to be blessed so that they can essentially lock players and hold them hostage in the future. So I think that's what Wisconsin is going after. I know I characterize that. I paint Wisconsin to be some terrible villain. Like I'm just shooting the breeze here, folks. Don't think I'm trashing Wisconsin or anything like that. But the whole thing's ridiculous to me, how they thought they can lock him into a revenue sharing deal in December when revenue sharing was not going to become official potentially until June with no guarantee of that. And it wasn't even put into effect until July. So I think any revenue sharing contract he signed in December was not a binding agreement. It was a memorandum of understanding. And I think that's why I don't believe Wisconsin has a big leg to stand on here. But that's the update there. Let me see. We got this one from the 239 who says, "Hey, apologies if I missed it, but have you already gone over the DJ Lagway injury with Florida and the Notre Dame offensive tackle injury?" Well, it's actually he's a former offensive tackle at Notre Dame. It's Charles Jagusa, who was expected to be Notre Dame's starting right guard this year. Like in terms of those injuries, I've barely, if ever, mentioned the Lagway injury because I don't think that's going to be an issue by the time Miami faces Florida. Like, so Lagway, I guess similarly to Carson Beck, for Beck, it was an elbow injury. For Lagway, it's a shoulder. He didn't throw during spring football, but seems to be fine now. Lagway was at SEC Media Days last week and said as much. Like physically, he's good. He's ready to go. So, I mean, Miami and Florida don't square off until week 4. So if he's got any rust, he's going to shake that rust by late December. Same thing with Beck. Like if Beck has any rust, I would imagine he's going to shake off that rust the first few weeks. Hopefully he shakes it off the first few reps because I don't want to lose to Notre Dame. But I think Lagway is going to be fine by September 20th. And listen, I know if you guys ever, and God forbid, if you watch Gators online content, except for I like my guy Brandon Olson because he keeps it professional, he keeps it real. Because the Locked On Network has standards, other networks do not. A lot of the Gator content creators spend more time talking about Miami and Florida State and like trying to spread rumors than they actually talk about their own team. Like I don't do that. I focus on Miami, and I don't really feel like DJ Lagway week 4 coming off an injury is a big deal right now. Now, as far as Charles Jagusa, the Notre Dame offensive lineman, I guess that's a bigger deal because this is talking about week 1, projected starter on Notre Dame's offensive line. So I think it was a few weeks ago, broke his arm in an ATV accident. I talked to our Notre Dame host, Tyler Wojcik, about that. And, he told me like this, it's easy for fans to say, hey, if you play football for a big program, you shouldn't be riding ATVs. It's too risky. But I mean, at the same time, people have lives outside of the field. And from like the actual accounts of the Jagusa ATV accident, like it doesn't sound like he was driving particularly irresponsibly. He was on some mud track somewhere and it was a freak accident. So it is what it is. But he broke his arm. And I was even reading, there were some like very optimistic Notre Dame reports that thought he might even be ready to go week 1. I'm doubtful of that. So, if you're looking, and I don't, by the way, folks, I don't wish injury on anybody. Like, I hope the young man does recover by week 1, because I don't want him to, miss any time because of a freak offseason accident. But I think Notre Dame's going to be down a starting right guard week 1. And, they've got a really strong starting 5 offensive line. They did lose some of their depth into the transfer portal, so they might be a little bit of a weaker state, when Miami faces Notre Dame that first week. So we'll see. A Notre Dame statement recently said on Charles Jagusa, the initial prognosis is favorable, and he will return to campus early this week. I don't know when this week. I think it was a few weeks ago. He will return to campus early this week for further evaluation and continued care, they said. So, all right, folks. Good morning, by the way, to Roger. Good morning to everybody. Eric D says, hey, why doesn't Miami open up that checkbook for Derrek Cooper? Well, here's the thing. Like, how much of this comes down to NIL, we'll find out. I will tell you that if Derrek Cooper does pick Miami, all the big reports are going to say Miami outbids Texas. How much money are they spending? Whereas if Derrek Cooper picks Texas, the headlines will be relationships win out. I mean, you know how they cover this stuff, folks. Anytime Miami wins a big recruitment, all of a sudden every national college football reporter, they become a CPA, they become a forensic accountant, and they claim to know exactly how much Miami is spending. But when, other big spenders, and by the way, Texas is a bigger spender than Miami. When Texas wins the recruitment, gosh, what a staff. Look at the work that Sark is doing. Look at the relationships that they're building. That's just unfortunately the way Miami gets covered versus the rest of college football. But bottom line, Eric, if this does come down to an NIL thing, Texas is going to be hard to outbid. I'll just leave it at that. Not easy to outbid a school like that. Oh, man. Folks, I appreciate you spending a Sunday with me. And so, all right, here's what I will say. As we go into, I give it about a 15-20% for Miami for Derrek Cooper tonight. I hope I'm wrong, right? Nothing would make me happier than to, 6:30 p.m. rolls around and Dennis Smith sends out a bat signal and it's like, oh my gosh, we might actually get this done. And then Miami lands the verbal. If that does happen, if Miami does pull off the upset tonight, I'll definitely try to put an episode together late this evening. As I mentioned, I'm going to be out to dinner, during the announcement, because I'm doing what I can. Usually if I'm on vacation or I'm out somewhere, Miami's got a better shot. This is just the way this thing works. So, whenever I get home, if Miami does get good news, 9:00 tonight, we'll do something. Otherwise, we'll think about all of our regrets and we'll talk to you again tomorrow morning. So make sure you smash that like button and subscribe. Subscribe to Locked On Canes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Subscribe on YouTube. Make sure to smash that thumbs up button. And we'll talk to you guys again maybe later tonight, probably tomorrow. Let's hope the Canes can pull it off this evening. We'll talk to you next time on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.